Who's St. John Hunt, you say? Most of you know who he is already, but if you don't know, he's the son of famed Watergate burglar / member of the Plumbers Union / CIA super spy is what I would really call him, E. Howard Hunt. And tonight he's going to be talking about his father's history, an insider's view with a bit of backdoor information. Understanding what he has to say and what he knows helps clear up a lot of stuff. It helps understand a lot of the backroom things, the behind-the-scenes things that were going on. It helps understand the geopolitical situation and the truth about the geopolitical situation. Anyway, I don't want to waste any more time. I want to bring him live to the air for you all right now. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big, warm welcome, down the rabbit hole style, as we always do, to St. John Hunt, my good friend, author, and, as I said, all-around interesting human being. St. John, welcome to the broadcast.
Yeah, I'm real glad to be here. I know it's been over a year since we met.
One simple question, and I'll let you go from there. St. John, who exactly was E. Howard Hunt?
E. Howard Hunt was one of the most influential persons behind the scenes, a CIA spy. He joined the CIA after it transformed from the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA. The OSS was the wartime intelligence gathering arm of the government, and after World War I ended, it was by decree Truman set up a peacetime intelligence gathering arm of the government, which was called Central Intelligence Agency. So some of the old boys that were in the OSS during World War II, my father was one of them, just continued right on with their spying and covert activities, gathering of intelligence, recruiting spies and double agents for foreign duty, right at its inception. And so my father was there on the first floor at the very beginning. He had a remarkable career, and one interesting part of this, which leads from Cuba all the way to the JFK assassination and into Watergate, is the fact that Vice President at the time was Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon had met my father in 1957 in Montevideo, Uruguay. They had lunch together. My father was deputy station chief of Montevideo, Uruguay, and on a goodwill tour of Latin America, he and Nixon had a chance to sit down together, and my father apparently was very complimentary of Nixon's handling of the Alger Hiss case and things like that, and Nixon remembered who my father was. Now, at the same time, Nixon and my father also started working on putting a group together, a secret group, which became known as Operation 40. Primarily because there were 40 people that knew about it, including its own members. This group was a group that continued on after Cuba and well into the 70s. What Operation 40 turned out to be was nothing more than a group of CIA-trained specialists in bomb-making, detonation, guerrilla warfare tactics, and assassination. And this group was turned loose on Fidel Castro to assassinate Castro. And Nixon was involved in this group, not only of its planning, but of giving it the White House approval, the green light from the White House. And this is years later on, during Watergate, this is one of the reasons why my father was so feared by Richard Nixon. So Bay of Pigs comes and goes. It's a failure. My father continues his work with Operation 40, to have foreign leaders assassinated. Then around 1970, he supposedly retired from CIA, but actually he went under deep cover and reported directly to CIA Director Richard Helms on Nixon's activities when Nixon was president there. I think he became president in 1968. By 1970, Nixon was looking for his own group of assassins and investigators because he was not getting the help that he wanted to from the FBI or from the CIA. And so he put together a group of trained intelligence operatives led by my father, and that group would become known as the Plumbers Unit. And they were called the Plumbers Unit because their initial mandate was to find out who was leaking the damning information. Pentagon Papers had been started to be leaked around 1970, 71, and Nixon was furious because it represented a huge weakness in their firewall protection. Someone was leaking information out to the New York Times, proving that the Vietnam War was absolutely a no-win situation, that it could never be won, and that we were, far more Americans were dying than we were, allowing the press to know, and that it was completely a no-win situation. Although Nixon was always crowing about, the end, the peace was at hand, and all this. The bombing of Cambodia was an illegal operation that Nixon did. And so they hired my father and Gordon Liddy and a number of other people to go ahead and find out where the leak was coming from, which they did. And that really was the start of Watergate. Watergate was an umbrella name for a vast amount of illegal activities that the Plumbers Group, who my dad headed, was involved in, including the potential firebombing of the Brookings Institute, the breaking and entering of Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office to find dirty information, if there was any, on Daniel Ellsberg, and then leak it to the press to discredit him. Really vengeful, to get back at him for leaking the Pentagon Papers. So then the burglars are caught at Watergate. My father's name appears in some of the personal effects of the Watergate burglars. This is June 1972. The protection that my father had always worked under with the CIA, number one, was that if you're caught by the enemy, your family will be taken care of without any question. And so when my father's name was brought out publicly in Watergate, because of Watergate, he was in a real bind. And he expected that same support from the Nixon White House. Well, the Nixon White House was all too ready to just cut my father loose and blame him as being the instigator of Watergate and someone with an overzealous imagination, kind of run wild. Nixon trying to save himself. Well, that wasn't going to work for my father, so they started threatening the president, saying directly to Nixon's top circle of advisors, including John Ehrlichman and Charles Colson and Haldeman, that my father had information that would blow Nixon completely out of the White House, bring John Mitchell, the Attorney General, to his knees, and send Ehrlichman and Haldeman and John Dean and Colson all to jail. And it was right at the height of this war with Nixon. I call it the war with Nixon from my family point of view. That my mother was getting on a plane, bringing this highly explosive evidence of Nixon's involvement in Operation 40 and also his involvement in the Watergate burglaries and the other illegal activities that he had approved of, to the safe house in Chicago. And coincidentally, that plane never made it. She never made it alive to Chicago. The plane exploded, missed the runway, and landed in the neighborhood, killing almost everybody on board, including some people that were on the ground. And that was pretty much the end of it. My father pled guilty within a week and kept his mouth shut and never spoke of it to me again after that. So there you have it. That's who my father was.
You had told me this interesting anecdotal story about when they were hunting down Che Guevara.
A part of the Operation 40 group was underneath the command of my father was a fellow by the name of Felix Rodriguez, and he was a Latin gentleman that was trained in assassination by my father and the CIA. He had been charged with in his Operation 40 group. He had been charged with tracking Che Guevara down, who was then in Bolivia, through the jungles. And this was a long, grueling chase for Felix. But Felix is one of those guys that you can point a finger at somebody and say, take care of this, and Felix will not stop, no matter what's put in front of him to block him, and he'll take care of the individual. But during this, they found Che Guevara, and they had him, locked up way up in the hills in Bolivia, in a little kind of a house with the members of the Bolivian regular army, and Felix and a couple of the Operation 40 guys there. Then the call was made to my father okay, well, what do we do now? Well, kill him. That was the order, it came from CIA, and so they did. But Felix, the specific order was let someone from the Bolivian army do it. So Felix handed the captain of the local Bolivian army the weapon, and he shot and assassinated Che Guevara. And just as an afterthought, Felix chopped the hands off Che and flew them back to the United States for verification through the CIA. And Felix still has those the hands in his house, his apartment. It's one of his best operations, according to him. So that was. Is that the story that I was saying? Yeah.
Yes, that's the interesting little anecdotal story that you had told me. Yeah, just amazing.
In the most basic sense, my father was a 27-year CIA operative who started at the very beginning of CIA in the late 1940s and went all through the 50s and 60s, and then retired in 1970 at the height of his career to work for President Nixon at the White House. So that's basically who my father was. All the things, the operations that he'd been involved in, were very significant operations the CIA conducted. They were all basically illegal assassination attempts. So this basically was the start of the CIA kind of running amok, and not furthering American foreign policy, but in fact dictating American foreign policy. Rather than the president saying, CIA, do this or that, it was now the CIA saying, Mr. President, we're doing this or that. We're going to do this or that. And in some cases, the president having absolutely no knowledge that there was an assassination squad named Operation 40 running around the world executing these guys. And when Kennedy found out about this Operation 40, he just basically went ballistic and put a stop to it, sent his brother, Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, out to the training camps with huge FBI men to arrest all the participants in these training camps here near New Orleans and in Florida, and put a stop to all this CIA running rampant and training these guerrillas for these different invasions of which Kennedy had no prior knowledge of. The atmosphere was set for a showdown between CIA and President John F. Kennedy.
I want to kind of lean into the Kennedy assassination a little bit, because I mean, this is real. You couldn't write this, St. John. I couldn't write this for Hollywood. All of this stuff, the info about your father, what really happened to your mom. You couldn't write this for Hollywood if you sat down for 3 days with some hallucinogenic drugs in a hotel room and came up with it. Like nobody could have, no writer in Hollywood ever could have come up with this. This couldn't have been a movie anybody ever created. It's so intense. So this is E. Howard Hunt, and this is him speaking to St. John. Here we go.
I heard from Frank that LBJ had designated Cord Meyer Jr. to undertake a larger organization while keeping it totally secret. Cord Meyer himself was a rather favored member of the Eastern aristocracy. He was a graduate of Yale University and had joined the Marine Corps during the war and lost an eye in the Pacific fighting. I think that LBJ settled on Meyer as an opportunist, parent like himself, a parent, and a man who had very little left to him in life ever since JFK had taken Cord's wife as one of his mistresses. I would suggest that Cord Meyer welcomed the approach from LBJ, who was, after all, only the vice president at that time. And, of course, could not number Cord Meyer among JFK's admirers. Quite the contrary. As for Dave Phillips, I knew him pretty well at one time. He worked for me during the Guatemala project. He had made himself useful to the agency in Santiago, Chile, where he was an American businessman. In any case, his actions, whatever they were, came to the attention of the Santiago station chief, and when his resume became known to people in the Western Hemisphere Division, he was brought in to work on Guatemalan operations. Sturges and Morales and people of that ilk stayed in apartment houses during preparations for the big event. Their addresses were very subject to change, so that where a fellow like Morales had been one day, you're not necessarily associated with that same address the following day. In short, it was a very mobile experience. Let me point out at this point that if I had wanted to fictionalize what went on in Miami and elsewhere during the run-up for the big event, I would have done so. But I don't want any unreality to tinge this particular story, or the information, I should say. I was a bench warmer on it, and I had a reputation for honesty. I think it's essential to refocus on what this information that I've been providing you, and you alone, by the way, consists of. What is important in the story is that we've backtracked the chain of command up through Cord Meyer and laying the doings at the doorstep of LBJ. He, in my opinion, had an almost maniacal urge to become president. He regarded JFK as he was, in fact, an obstacle to achieving that. He could have waited for JFK to finish out his term and then undoubtedly a second term. So that would have put the LBJ at the head of a long list of people who were waiting for some change in the executive branch.
Now, that's just a small snippet of the actual full audio that's out there, I know there's actually more than that, but if people want, you can go find it on YouTube. There's the full length. I think it's in 2 pieces, and I suggest you listen to everything that E. Howard Hunt had to say that's out there, that St. John has released, that's out there. Pay attention, do a little research, listen to what he says, listen to the names he mentions, the people he mentions. You'd have to be an inside player to know some of these names. David Phillips? You mean David Atlee Phillips? The guy that Lee Oswald told Judith Baker, if there's one name you ever remember this one, David Atlee Phillips. That David Atlee Phillips? Frank Sturgis? David Morales? 2 guys that are connected to the assassination of not only John F. Kennedy, but Robert Kennedy later on. Interesting. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. Of course, I don't believe in coincidences. I want to pick St. John's brain about this. St. John, first and foremost, I guess the first question I'm sure everybody wants to know, a little bit of background history on the tapes that your dad sent you. How long ago did he send you the original tapes, and how exactly did it go about? When your father first sent you the tapes, how long ago was it? And then, was it out of the blue? Was this expected? How did it go?
Yeah, the first tape, the first and only tape came in the mail to me, quite surprising. It was not anything that I was expecting. It wasn't anything that my father had forewarned me about. But just prior to that, I had visited him in Miami, and we had talked of the need for him to put his life story down in an autobiography, which I would help him write, because he was in his mid-80s then, and he had already had a lot of medical health problems, although his mind was as sharp as a razor blade. I felt that for a long time his name had been dragged through the press ever since Watergate, that people had made hundreds of thousands of dollars selling their books, accusing my father of various misdeeds, assassinating President Kennedy or having something to do with that, being one of the three tramps in Dealey Plaza. Just basically about everything bad the CIA did, people were willing to use E. Howard Hunt as the example and make money off it in their books. And I really wanted to appeal to his anger. Really, I wanted to get him so angry that he would, in one final attempt, put everything down truthfully in a book that he could publish and pass away, knowing that he had said the final word on all these things. And so I came back to California, and within a couple of weeks I got a package from Miami, and it was a little cassette tape, no explanatory note, nothing, and I knew it was from my father because I saw his scrawl on the cassette. And I put it in my cassette player, and this is what came out. But when you listen to this tape, like you said, the names that he mentions, first of all, the umbrella operation of the assassination was codenamed by this faction of assassins, and I have to here specify that there was more than one or two groups of assassins waiting for Kennedy to the right place in the right time for his removal. The group that my father was involved in was this Miami group that spun off from Operation 40. The assassination was codenamed by my father the Big Event. So when you hear my father say the big event, the run-up for the big event, we're talking about a group of gentlemen getting together at safe houses, which my father describes, and discussing the removal of President Kennedy as the big event. So there was many reasons why Kennedy was wanted to be killed. And of course, Lyndon Johnson, who had already been complicit in 6 or 7 murders, and this is all accurate, would have stopped at nothing to become president, especially considering that the Kennedys were dropping Johnson from the vice presidency, because Johnson was about to be indicted by the American justice system under Robert Kennedy. He falsely became elected for the Congress and the Senate by names and by bribery. So the Kennedys were within a week of dropping LBJ from the vice presidency, thus preventing Johnson from ever achieving presidency. And that was another reason why Kennedy had to go, because as long as Johnson was still vice president, he would automatically be president once Kennedy was killed. And that's exactly how it went down. You know, we've talked about so far the very beginnings of Operation 40, what the purpose of Operation 40 was, who was involved in the planning and arrangement of Operation 40, which was Vice President Nixon back in 1960, 1959, and my father, of course, who Nixon knew back from 1957. Then when my father was under indictment for Watergate, my mother, who had been a CIA herself, starting back in pre-CIA actually, OSS, starting back in 1945, she was stationed in Bern, Switzerland. She was involved in an operation called Operation Safe Haven, which was a joint OSS and Treasury Department operation to track down Nazi assets and currency. And not only that, but to block the continued flow of Nazi money coming from the burning of the Jews and the smelting of their gold watches and their teeth fillings and things like that, and then being placed in banks in Switzerland where the Nazis could continue drawing the money out to fund their quest for world domination. So she was in the thick of it for many, many years. But here we are in 1972, and she's on the verge of divorcing my father for infidelities. Yet she to her own legacy, she stood by his side and served as the Watergate bag woman, they called her, the money person. In other words, she would be at a phone booth at a preconceived, at a preset time to receive a phone call at a payphone, directing her to a locker or a bus terminal or an airport terminal or a phone booth in Washington, D.C. at a very late hour at night to pick up a key that was taped under a phone or taped under a water cooler that would then open up a box at the Greyhound station or at the airport. And inside there would be, of course, a bag with cash, which she would then bring home and then disperse to the Cubans and to our own family and to Gordon Liddy's family. She was on her way to Chicago on a flight that was misdirected from landing at O'Hare Airport. It was sent over to Midway. There was an investigation done which in the end said it was pilot error, but when you look at the facts, and I'm just going to run through these because I know we're running out of time, but this is really important. This is a Watergate plane crash where a lot of people died, including my mother. There was a bag of cash that was found that she was bringing to Chicago to pay off a Chicago electronics eavesdropping expert who had manufactured some of the Watergate burglar supplies during the Watergate break-in. Okay, number one, the White House tapes, the Nixon White House tapes reveal that Nixon and Charles Colson, his closest advisor who had hired my dad, knew that Dorothy was taking that trip to Chicago. The FBI knew that that flight, that there was something going to be occurring with that flight because they had 50 FBI agents in one sitting place that responded to that flight and were there between 20 and 40 minutes after the plane crashed. The FBI agents at the scene of the crash at first admitted that they had 12 agents that reached the scene of the crash. Later it was revealed in a direct letter between the head of the FBI in Chicago and the head of the National Transportation and Safety Board that investigated the crash that there was 50 agents on the ground. The FBI has no jurisdiction in domestic air disasters, none whatsoever. They had no legal right to be there. They invoked the claim that they had right because they had evidence of air piracy and sabotage, thus giving them the authority to be at the site. Not only that, but within minutes after the flight, someone claiming to be from the FBI confiscated the flight recorder tapes from the control tower at Midway Airport. The very next day after the flight, December 9th, 1972, President Richard Nixon appointed one of his top consultants in the White House, a man that was my father's superior, Eagle Crow, to the position of Undersecretary of Transportation. Crow was a Nixon loyalist and one of 3 White House officials that were my father's superiors in the secret plumbers team that carried out all of Nixon's illegal activities, the 2 others being Attorney John Mitchell and Special Counsel to the President Charles Colson. The Department of Transportation, which Eagle Crow was now in the position of Undersecretary of, oversees all of the National Transportation and Safety Board investigations and is the sole investigating unit for airline crashes. Therefore, Eagle Crow was in the position to not only guide the investigation but also to include or exclude pertinent information about the crash, and according to the New York Times, kept Nixon informed as to the particulars of the investigation on a day-to-day basis. Michelle Clark, a CBS News reporter, had agreed to meet with my mother on that flight. She was on that flight, and she was killed, to discuss breaking the truth about the Watergate to the world. This was after many threats had gone from my parents to the Nixon White House, demanding either money or clemency for my father and the Cubans and Gordon Liddy. Just hours after the crash, an anonymous call was made to WBBM Chicago. The caller was a self-described radio ham who had monitored the ground control's communication with 553, that was the United flight that went down, and reported an exchange concerning gross control tower error or sabotage. The tail flight recorder on the plane stopped recording 14 minutes prior to the crash. The Midway control tower did not report the crash until 5 minutes after it happened. The pilot, Wendell Whitehouse, was one of the most respected and revered pilots in the United Airlines family. He had had 18,000 hours of flight since 1956 and 2,435 hours in a Boeing 737. His first officer, Coble, had 10,006 hours flight hours. Second officer, Barry Elder, had 2,700 flight hours. These were seasoned pilots that had never, ever been involved in airplane, in landing error or anything like that. Dwight Chapin, a bagman for Nixon, one of the people that delivered money to my mother, joined United Airlines as director of market and planning. He attended every day the National Transportation and Safety Board hearings and also reported back to Richard Nixon. It just, the list just goes on and on and on. On board, there was two other people on board that were a threat to the White House. Real quickly, it was due to a bribery scandal that was being investigated with Attorney General John Mitchell. He was under investigation for corruptly helping the El Paso Natural Gas Company against its main competitor, the Northern Natural Gas Company. Mitchell's decision to go with the El Paso netted him $300 million to El Paso, of which he skimmed millions of dollars off the top of that. The fact that a letter sent by the head of the National Transportation and Safety Board, John Reed, to FBI Director William Ruckelshaus, June 5th, 1973, said that for the first time in the memory of their staff, an FBI agent went to the control tower, listened to the tower tapes, and took them. And the first time that they knew FBI agents were involved in a domestic airline crash, which they had no basis being involved in whatsoever. The response from Director William Ruckelshaus to John Reed said that the FBI's primary investigation jurisdiction in connection with the destruction of aircraft or motor vehicles. This relates to aircraft privacy, interference with flight crew members, and certain specified crimes aboard aircraft in flight, including assault, murder, manslaughter, and attempts to commit murder or manslaughter. So the FBI was poised at a location waiting for that plane to do whatever it was going to do, either land or be destroyed. When the airline itself was approaching Chicago, visibility was 1 to 2 miles, yet the runway visual range recorder was turned off and not working. The Midway Airport outer marker stopped working just as Flight 553 approached it and went back on just after the Flight 553 crashed. And these are exhibits in the National Transportation Board, Exhibit 12A, page 3. Midway Tower steered a small propeller plane, Aerial Commander license number N30NVS, right in front of 553 as 553 was coming in for a landing. This caused the control tower to direct 553 to do a reapproach. But the handoff between O'Hare and Midway, it's called a premature handoff. They stopped watching Flight 553 from O'Hare too soon. And at that time, Midway did not have precision radar. That's why all the planes were going to flight to Airport O'Hare instead of Midway, except my mother's plane. The Cadizi markers, which are the localizer lights, were shut off. And you can hear the captain talking to the tower saying, is the Cadizi localizer off the air? Is that it? And the captain says, Cadizi localizer off the air. There's an inbound, what's that? And that was when the little plane came in front of them and they had to land. The plane was told to land on runway 31 to the right. But little planes are designed, are supposed to be ordered to land on 31 to the left. And so you have this situation where the pilot was being given misinformation, wrong information, lights were going off, there was no way to bring the plane in safely, and the plane landed in a residential area, killing almost everybody aboard. And 1 week later, my father pleaded guilty to all charges. And in the last year of his life, he told me as he squeezed my hand and his eyes welled up with tears, he said that he knew that my mother had been murdered. Charles Colson admitted that she had been murdered by the CIA, and that he was concerned with the life of his children. And because he was in prison, he could not protect us, and he never brought it up again. But finally, in the last weeks of his life, he told me that he knew that she had been killed to keep him quiet. He had evidence that would have impeached Richard Nixon right then and there at the time relating to Watergate and Operation 40. That's about all I can say right now.
Well, St. John, you can take a few minutes if you need it to get your thoughts together and catch yourself. I know it's an emotional subject for you. In fact, I witnessed myself, you and I talk about this, and I saw the raw emotion you have over this myself, and I completely understand how you feel. So feel free to take a few minutes, brother, and collect yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, this is in and of itself a conspiracy. Remember, the term conspiracy means two or more people getting together to do something bad. And Dorothy was more than just E. Howard Hunt's wife and St. John's mom. And although those were two huge roles that she played here on Earth, she was also in the know. She knew a lot. She knew perhaps too much. And it goes to show you what happens and what they're willing to do when people know too much. I mean, think about it. They crashed an entire plane full of people into a residential area to make a point.
It's stjohnhunt.net, SAINTJOHNHUNT.net. It's kind of a fun website. It's 4 or 5 pages deep. It's got 3 or 4 different sections. It's got great pictures of my family in the kind of a photo album section. It's got some live interviews that I've done at various JFK conventions in the interview section, and it's got 15 or 16 music videos that I've put together of my own original compositions and playing with different bands I've put together over the years. So there's a lot of neat stuff there. I'm also offering some first edition copies of my father's books that come from my own personal library, as well as the 2 current books that I have authored, Bond of Secrecy and Dorothy, which if you buy them from the website, I'll autograph them and send them to you.